we are in our series called Real Friends. Yeah, thank you. All right. So let me ask you guys, have you ever had a moment when you've thought to yourself, how did this happen to me? Anybody ever been in a moment like that? All right, you can actually talk about it in some of your groups if you want. For me, I had a spot. I was in college. I was actually in a gap year. So that means like I took a year off from school. I was actually doing an internship, traveling the country. It was pretty cool. And we traveled the country in an awesome van like this. I know. It was amazing. Yeah. No. Wow, everybody's got jokes about the van I was forced to travel in with 12 other guys. All right, so we were actually down in Florida. We had a membership to the YMCA. So we're down in Florida doing some work. We had a membership to the YMCA. We were at the gym. And then there was a couple of guys on our team that were from the South. There was one guy, his name was Naoki. He was from Japan, a good friend of mine. So Naoki, we decide, how many of you guys have ever seen the A-Team? Old classic TV? One episode? Okay, so they used to have this really cool van. This is not going to translate, all right? They had this really cool van, and one of the things that they would do is, like, while they were driving, they would open up the sliding door on the van, and then they would jump in, okay? Because that was apparently really cool. So we decide to leave the YMCA, and we are going to drive up and then drive back to the place that we're staying. And Naoki hadn't gotten into the van yet, and he's the last one coming. And we one of the guys leans out the window and he says, "Let's A-Team it." And so by this point, we all kind of knew what that meant because, we had a giant van, and that meant we were going to start to pull away, and then he was going to jump in while the doors were open. All right. So the driver was messing with him a little bit. And so we drove off fast, and then he had to run and the YMCA was tucked way back off the road. And so there was this kind of long driveway up. And then as you're driving, it start to get developed and a bunch of houses and businesses all on the side. All right. So he's running really far length because we had just pulled way ahead, and we're just sneaking through. So we get up to where there's actually traffic. And so all of a sudden what we do is he decides to play the joke back on us. And so he runs past us as we were waiting. No big deal. So no. So we open the doors up all the way, have them all the way open, and then drive up as fast as we can. A couple of guys get out, grab him, and then yank him and throw him into the van. And then to be funny, we decided to slam the doors and peel out and try to take off. Well, then we got caught at the traffic light there. What we didn't realize was just as he had passed us, and then we sped up to catch him and then all jump out, grab him and then throw him in the van and then drive off, a cop had pulled up and basically see a bunch of guys jump out of this van, grab this guy who was running away, yank him into the van, shut the doors, and then peel out. This cop pulls us over, and then he pulls us over, and by this point we're like, oh no, this is going to be so awesome and so cool. And all of us are like, how did this happen? How did this happen? How did this happen? No big deal. We'll just kind of explain it. So the driver rolls down the window, the cop comes up, and how many of you want to guess? Do you think the police officer was level-headed and calm, or do you think he was yelling at us trying to figure out what just happened with this kidnapped Asian man? At first, I was like, there's no big deal. Naoki will just explain what happened, and no problem. Well, his English is a little bit broken, and now he's scared. So the cop's like, what happened? Are you okay? Are you good? and he starts stuttering and not being able to really speak and communicate. So we can't, the driver's like, oh no, it's no problem. He's with us. We were just like playing a prank on him and trying to, he's like, is that what happened? Is that what, officer, he's like, what is going on? And so at this point, I'm like, oh my goodness, we're all going to go to jail. How did this happen? Well, eventually, we're able to fully explain it. And the police officer turns, he's like, don't ever do that again. The driver said, yes, officer, yes, sir. And then we drive like grandmas the rest of the way back home because we were terrified. It's one of those like cool stories, cool things that happens. You're like, this is going to be so much fun. And then all of a sudden you're stuck in the situation. You're like, how did this happen? I was terrified. I was ready to pee my pants. And see, that is one of the questions that we deal with in our life, right? Chances are maybe you've gotten in trouble. You've had some friends that were around you, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation and you ask yourself this question: how did this happen to me? It's happened to me plenty of times. I'm sure it's happened to you. Now, here's the deal. We all tend to see our bad decisions as something that has happened to us, right? I saw that situation. I was one of the guys that suggested it. I was one of the guys that jumped out and mugged my friend. I was actually the best man at his wedding, all right? So, like, we're tight. But the whole time I'm thinking to myself, how did this happen to me? Like, it was some sort of like spatial anomaly to where like I just like happened to walk into this, and like it's all the cop's fault because he happened to show up at that time, you know? And here's the reality. Every time we get stuck in one of those situations, we always kind of view it as something happening to us. But what's the common denominator in our choices? What is the common denominator in all of our choices and all of what we're doing and all of what we're seeing? It's you, right? It is not. If we want a cold, hard dose of reality, yes, stuff will happen to us. Sometimes we're caught in a bad situation, but most of the time in our life, when it comes down to the choices and then where we find ourselves and when we get ourselves in trouble, most of the time it's because of us. The reality is that most of the choices we make and the negative consequences that we experience don't just happen to us, we happen to them. We happen to them. And we aren't just innocent bystanders. We're participants. We are participators. And I want to help you, and I'll just stop and say this. This is something that, if I say it to you, does that make sense? Like, you do things, and you don't really even mean for them to have consequences, right? Like, sometimes, like, I'm just hanging out with my friends. They're my friends. It's no big deal. And all of a sudden, something happens, and you really didn't do anything to try to cause it. You might be a victim of the circumstances, but you put yourself in that spot, right? Does that make sense? Do you guys see that happening? But here's the reality. The way our world looks at it, most of the time, everybody, anytime a circumstance happens to us, what do we view it as? We are the victim. Right? We're in a class and something goes bad. And maybe we were being quiet and doing exactly what we were supposed to. But there's a lot of times to where, like, you know, we're egging on the conversation a little bit, or we haven't withdrawn from it, and all of a sudden the teacher comes back in, or the teacher says, hey, guys, stop it. And you're like, oh man, like these, like, I'm just innocent. And the reality is sometimes you are, but a lot of times the choices you make have consequences, right? And we're not just innocent bystanders. Most of the time, we are participators. And I want to help you to look at one of the things that contributes to you making bad decisions over and over again. When we make bad decisions, when we turn against the way that God wants us to, sometimes it's our own choices, but sometimes it's some of the choices that we're making are helping influence our bad decisions. And a lot of times what it comes down to is not just how you think, but who influences you the most in your life? Your sister? Okay. Your father. Sometimes it's your parents. A lot of times, who is it? Your friends, right? Your friends have the most influence on you. Your parents have the most influence on you. Your friends are right there with that. And when it comes to it, we want those closest to us to be real friends, right? I was just thinking about it because, like, with Naoki and the situation that happened to him, if we actually got arrested and there was a problem with it and he was involved with it, he could get sent right back home to Japan. Yeah. He was here on a student visa. He was studying in college. But here's the thing. All that stuff that happens, like when we were like, hey, we're just gonna go do this, we had no idea that could happen. And honestly, that happens in life sometimes, but a lot of times when it comes to the choices that we make, our friends have a huge influence over us and we have a huge influence over them, and we need to be real friends to them. You know, last week we talked about being the type of friend you would want to have. If you got your Bibles, turn to John chapter 15. We're going to look at verses 12 through 15, but I'm going to put them up on the screen for you in case you don't have them. This is what it says in John chapter 15, verses 12 through 15, as Jesus is talking about friendships. It says, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. All right, so most of the time we just say, hey, we should all love each other, right? So Jesus says that, but then he qualifies it, or he puts something next to it to say, okay, this is how I want you to love them, as I have loved you. And so the example of how we love if we're followers of Jesus is Jesus. It's a command that he has for us. He goes on, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Is that a true statement? The greatest sacrifice of love, and love truly is a sacrifice. It's I'm giving up myself for what's best for you. Not just maybe what you want, but what's actually best for you. That's what true love really is. Verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command. And so if we want to be friends with Jesus, we listen to him. Right? And that's normal, right? Your friends, do you listen to your friends? If you feel like I can't listen to them, are they actually friends of yours, or are you just like people that cross paths? Verse 15, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. But instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. And so Jesus is actually passing on who God is. And that's what true friends really do. It's sacrifice. It's loving the other person deeply. It's showing them who God is. And Jesus wanted them to know about God. And he knew that close friends have influence over each other. Friends listen and do what their friends say, right? And he wanted to use his influence to bring us life and to show us God. And this idea of influence of friends, this isn't new. It wasn't even new in Jesus' time. See, in a book in the Old Testament of the Bible, Proverbs, it's a bunch of wise sayings kind of collected together. It talks of the importance of friends' influences over our lives. And so Jesus says, hey, listen, you need to be a good friend. And I'm going to define what a good friend looks like. I give my life for you. I point you to God. That's what true friendship really looks like. But Solomon, one of the wisest men to ever live, he dealt with the heartache of not listening to wisdom in his life. And this is what he has to say about friendship in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 26. It says, the righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. See, righteous people are people who do the right thing, or they listen to what God says. They do what God's right is. And they're made righteous not by doing a bunch of good things, but by trusting God. And because they trust God, they listen to God. And so they do right things. Do you see how that works? All right. So what is the characteristic of a righteous person? What is one of the characteristics of a righteous person? What do they do according to this verse? What does the verse say after the righteous? They choose their friends carefully. Good, good. Right? See, you guys just did a small Bible study there. Right? Do you guys realize that? The righteous, what do? They choose their friends carefully. All right? If we want to be righteous people who make right decisions that honor God, that are influenced like Jesus, then what does Solomon say we need to do? We need to choose our friends carefully. See, learning now how to choose your friends will impact your ability to influence and the course of your life as you go forward, leading you to joy or bringing you to pain. See, real friends have real influence. Real friends have real influence. Now, what happens in the second half of the verse? But the way of the wicked leads them astray. The way of the wicked leads them astray. When Solomon says wicked, he basically means the opposite of righteous. He's talking about bad decision makers. They may not seem like bad people, but anybody that leads you down a bad path is at minimum just being a bad friend at that point, right? Like, I could be really close to you, but if I'm like, hey, you should go home and shoot your brother and sister. Right? Now, I might be a great guy. The fact that I've said that makes me not a great guy, right? And here's the thing. That's like a really exaggerated example. But good friends, do they push you towards good decisions or bad? Good, right? The wicked, which way do they push you? Towards wicked decisions or good decisions? Wicked decisions, right? The wicked lead them astray. And when you lead somebody astray, God calls that wicked. Now, what was the question? Go ahead. Well, we'll talk about that in a second, and we'll talk about that actually in a couple of weeks. But I would say, I just throw this out. If your friend's going to abandon you because you won't do something they have asked you to do, and what they're asking you to do is not good, so this is one of the harder questions, because I know for you guys, like close friendships, you're like, okay, I can't sacrifice any of them, because if I do, I'm left with none, and I'd rather have bad friends than be alone. Yeah, that's the normal rationale on it. The reality is that God tells us, listen, but if your friends are going to be pushing you in the wrong direction and then saying, well, I'm not going to be your friend unless you do that. But let's take the emotion out of it for just a second. Are they really good friends at that point? Just think about it. If your parents were like, listen, I need you to listen to me, or I'm never going to feed you again. Would you go, you know what? They're really good parents. See? No, that's not. But most of the time, we would still call those people good friends because we don't want to lose them, right? God calls it wicked when friends do that. And most of the time we don't want to call it that way, but that's what God calls it. He calls it wicked. And we have a choice at that point. Do I listen to God and trust his friendship, or do I listen to myself? Paul, in talking about giving his life for this new life with Jesus, he brings up a slogan that many people have probably lived by in our world, and people were living by back then. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 32 through 34. Verse 32, it says, if I had fought wild beasts in Ephesus, so Ephesus is a city, with no more than human hopes, what have I gained? So in other words, he's going through and he's sharing Jesus with people, but if it's just because I'm just trying to do it, it's just the religious thing to do, the nice thing to do, but Jesus really hasn't risen from the dead, like, if it's just like trying to be a good person, if I've fought wild beasts in Ephesus with no more than human hopes, what have I gained? If the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. And here's the reality that Paul's pointing out. And this is kind of what Rome lived by. And you guys, it's funny, our culture today is it's like a mishmash. We want to be able to say, okay, we live to care for other people, right? Most people want to say that. But the way that we typically live our lives is, okay, let me get what I can for today, for tomorrow. If I die, like, at least I lived it up today. Did you guys realize 2,000 years ago that phrase was sitting in the Bible and we're seeing it in our culture? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. And so really, it's just live for today. Live for today, live for today. But Paul goes on as he's talking about it. It says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Come back to your senses as you ought and stop sinning, for there are some who are ignorant of God. I say this to your shame. See, bad company corrupts good morals. It corrupts good character. And God wants us to be influenced by those who are influenced by him. God wants us to be influenced by those who are influenced by him. Some of you may feel shame over this as you think about your friendship and the circles that you have. And Paul talks about it, that if we're a follower of Jesus, it should be to our shame if we're not listening to God in this. But when we have shame or when we have guilt, do we just sit there and like, oh, God has rejected me, I turn my back on him? Or when we're actually convicted by it, we turn and we say, hey, God, thank you for showing me this. I can turn and I can trust you on this. To where I recognize that I have been in a spot to where my closest friends have been influencing me, not towards you, but away from you. Now, this only makes sense if Jesus rose from the dead. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, live it up, guys. Get what you get today, because tomorrow there's nothing left. But Jesus really did rise from the dead, then we live for something so much more. And even our friendships have to have influence over our lives. And so what do we do with it? Do we turn to God? Say, okay, God, I trust you on it. I've told you the story of my best friend in high school who died in a car accident. All right, for some of you, you've heard it. His name was JJ. We were really good friends. He would spend the night at my house my junior and senior year, probably three to four nights a week. Like, I basically had a section of my room that was his room. And he'd come over to the house and stay, and that's what we do. And then he'd drive and either go to school. He was 1 year ahead of me, so he actually got a job my senior year, and so he'd go to work. And so he'd spend the night at my house and then go to work. And so, like, he was a brother to me. And towards the end of my senior year, he started, like, hanging out with some friends that got him into partying and drinking. It was a lot of it by his own choice. Thanksgiving Eve, 2002. Yep. Excuse me, Thanksgiving Eve, 2003. It was my freshman year of college. He was out partying and drinking, and he was on Route 50. Ended up deciding in his little Ford Escort to see how fast he could get it to go. And was drunk, ended up hitting a tree head on at 90 miles an hour. It was one of the more sobering things to walk his casket, and they couldn't open it up because his body was so messed up. Now, that's an extreme example, but he was just hanging around a bunch of people that did it all the time. I remember talking to him about it once. He's like, like, it's fine. Like, we're not really getting into that much trouble. Like, it's not that big a deal. And I can just remember carrying his casket thinking of that statement. Now, listen, guys, am I saying you make one bad decision, you're going to die from it? No. Could it be? Yeah. I can't guarantee anything. That was an extreme example. But he never thought it would happen to him.
You always think that.
Everybody always thinks that. It won't happen to me, right? But Paul says, hey, listen, bad company corrupts good morals. Repent of your sin. Let this be to your shame, right? Shame is supposed to make your head go down so that you turn away from it, right? Most of the time, we always look at shame as a bad thing, all right? And I'm not saying like we need to shame each other. I'm talking about like when we come face to face with God on something and we realize, oh, God, like I'm recognizing my own shame in this moment. God says, hey, let that sink in so we can turn to him and trust him on it. And so for some of us, as we're thinking about our friendships, we got to ask ourselves, is this person a good influence on me right now? Is this person a good influence on me right now? I know for many of you, we talked about already, the fear that comes in with that. Well, what if they leave me? What if they don't like me? But I can tell you this, there's nothing I would give for JJ to have left all of his friends and maybe been home alone for a little while and dealing with loneliness than walking his casket. It's where they put a dead body. Coffin. It's a box where they put dead bodies. Listen, I know that's dramatic. I know it's like an extreme example. But look at me. I'm just a normal guy, right? And it happened to me and one of my friends. And for some of you, it's already happened to you guys, you know. And so you have to ask yourself, is this person a good influence on me right now? The people that you invite into your inner circle. See, you need people around you who see more than right now, more than just right now. It doesn't mean that you don't have to interact with some of those friends, but maybe change the amount of influence they have over your life. You need people around you who see more than just this moment. And so here's the point that I want to leave you guys with. Guard your inner circle. Guard your inner circle.
What if you try to like influence yourself onto them? It's like, let's say you're like a good kid in like school and they're the bad kid and you guys end up being friends. And instead of them having an influence on you, you have an influence on them.
Yeah. Well, maybe let me put it this way. I'm going to put a chart up, and that might help you to kind of think about it. So you have your inner circle. These are your closest friends. Now, what the inner circle is supposed to be is, I influence you, you deeply influence me. Right? And just think about how this naturally works. Your inner circle of friends, they have that influence over you, right? Like, it's not like you go up and you're like, can you deeply influence me and I'll deeply influence you, right? It's not something where you're like doing a checklist. It happens, right? This is what that inner circle is. Here's the next circle. I will call it the middle circle. These are friends, all right? They're good friends, but you're kind of the influencer because you're receiving influence from that other circle. You're either the influencer or you're like there to like care, but like they don't have a huge influence over you. That's just like normal friendship. So yeah, best friends, regular friends, and then the outer circle, acquaintances. These are people that you know, like you'll call them friends, but the reality is you're like, what was their last name? I can't really remember. Like we talk a lot, but it's like they don't really have much influence over you. When we think of our friendships, we need to think of them in these tiers. And it's not like, okay, Sally's in here and Jimmy's in here and oh, they're all the way out here. It's not meant to like exclude and include and those type of things. But it's for us to mentally kind of think through, okay, so if I have a friend who's kind of a bad influencer, should I let them into the inner circle of my life to where I listen to them, they listen to me, and we go back and forth on everything and we deeply have influence on each other? Should I let them into that group to where they're the group that spends the most time speaking into my life? No. Can I let them into the middle circle? Yeah. In fact, the Bible calls us to. And so it isn't that we run away from people who are bad influencers. Here's the problem, though. Most of the time, we get so close to the people who maybe are bad influencers that we invite them into our inner circle without even thinking about it. And we don't have other people around to speak to us, to say, hey, be careful, watch out. Other people that we invite in to say, hey, I'm hanging out with this person. Can you speak into my life and let me know if I'm going too far or if I'm missing it somewhere? Can you imagine if you had friends that were that devoted to you that they might even be willing to say something hard to you? We're going to talk about that some next week. Who do you let into your inner circle of friends? Imagine if we influence people towards God and we let the people who are inner circle, they were the ones that influenced us towards God. Imagine what would happen if we did that. Imagine what would happen if we had a tighter grip on our inner circle. This doesn't mean like you reject the friends in the middle. You could be just the same amount of friends, but you have a tight group on the inside that really, really speaks to you. We're going to talk about friendships some more in groups, and we're going to split you guys off so you guys can go. But I want to challenge you guys this week. Think about it. How am I going to guard my inner circle? How am I going to guard my inner circle? All right, go ahead and break off into groups.